Our mission at Connect Church is to help people find and follow Jesus. For more information on who we are and how we're doing just that, visit myconnectchurch.cc. Now, let's jump into this week's message from Pastor Blaine.
We're going to begin in Luke chapter 8 today. Luke chapter 8. I guess I got this sweater on. I am roasting. Oh, I got my calisthenics in during worship, I guess. I'm not sure, but I guess I thought, thank you, I appreciate that. I guess I thought I was preaching outside today. It's going to be cold today, but not in here, so maybe it is. How would I know if it's cold in here or not? I don't know. Luke chapter 8, we're going to begin reading in verse 41. Give you just a moment to find it. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. And Jesus went, and people pressed about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up to him and touched the fringe of his garment. Before I go any further, there are a lot of questions that arises out of this. But this word "to touch" actually means to like adhere to or to cling to. So there may have been just a little more tension or pull than would be a normal walking through a crowd of people. So it's important for us to understand that while she was trying to be private, there was a great deal of desperation that was being applied here in her life as well. And Jesus said, touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And while he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead." Wow, don't mince any words here. That's a pretty subtle. Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear. Only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter, John, and James, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing, that word is not like it's more of a perceiving with the eyes. They experienced it with their eyeballs, right? It's the word "ido," which means we saw it with our own eyes, that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given her to eat, and her parents were amazed. But he charged them to tell no one what happened. Have you ever been afraid? Have you ever been almost paralyzed by fear? There's been a lot of times in my life where I have, and I don't mean like afraid of the dark or afraid of a dark church at night or of a cemetery at night when you're with friends. As you get older, you realize that there's a lot scarier things than the dark. I remember when I was little, I had a friend spend the night with me. And my friend, I did take a risk because I did know this ahead of time. He is a sleepwalker. And his mom and dad, actually, at some of their doors, he would get up and leave at night. He would leave the house as if a little kid. And so they had to put locks on the outside of their doors, on some of the doors that he would go out. And so, you know, being in a strange place, I didn't worry too much about that. And being a kid, I probably could care less too. What I didn't know is he also talks in his sleep. And so we were laying there asleep, and he had a nickname for me. And I don't know why. It nearly never made sense. But I used to be able to pull my ears out really far. Okay? And sometimes I would do that. And he called me Ears. And he'd say, "Hey, Ears." It'd just be fun, you know. He had big old teeth, so I called him. Well, anyway, so, but we were laying there asleep, and I've always been afraid at nighttime. I hear things, I see things, I sense things. So I'm laying there, I'm a really light sleeper, and I wake up and I hear him talking. And he said, "I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him." And I was already making sure my window was closed. But I heard him say, "He's got big ears. I'm going to kill him." And I was shaking, terrified. And I didn't sleep that night because I thought, I don't know how he's going to do it, but I know he's going to get me. And he's not going to know it. He's going to wake up in a pool of my blood. That's terrible. You can imagine. But you know, you get older, you realize that there are scarier things than that. A lot scarier things than that. Things that aren't temporary. This passage deals with what I would say is one of the scariest things imaginable. I don't know that anything could get scarier than the desperation for the life of your child. And sooner and later, we're all going to face very fearful circumstances, fearful situations, and we don't know what to do. And I think God orchestrates it in a way that everyone, at least once, has to face a wall of desperation and make a choice. Sometimes you have to go through that many times. And I've learned in our country, and especially in our culture, we're going to exhaust every possible option before we consider becoming desperate. You know, used to, and this is going to sound like a really paradoxical problem that we have, but used to, people would hit rock bottom a lot sooner than they do now. Because there's a lot more help for people. There's a lot more sustenance, a lot more programs, a lot more patience, a lot more benevolence, and a lot more good work, sometimes even God work that the gospel is absent from. So people can sustain a desperation a lot longer than they used to. People used to have to choose the gospel or nothing a lot quicker. People don't come to their last resort very quickly anymore, if at all. But here, this is what happens relatively quickly, a last resort. In fact, this is a series of stories of desperation, complete fear, and panic. And just like Peter, when his eyes are off of Jesus, the bottom suddenly drops out and we're overwhelmed. And you woke up one day and you did not know what a day may bring. Sometimes our choices bring us there. Sometimes God's sovereign plan for our life and His allowance brings us there. But regardless, today I want to talk about a few things that we can learn and do during those times. When we face fear and when we face desperation, when we face identity issues, when we face lies, we face the pressure, I think it's very important for us to understand that God is consistently calm and steady. What I would say there is that our desperation never creates God's desperation. God never says, "Uh-oh, I don't know how this slipped by me. I was dealing with this lady, but now this thing's happening. I just can't keep up." You never have to worry about the Lord feeling the pressure. Throughout history, you'll never see Jesus respond with the same emotional urgency. He remains calm because the circumstance of your life does not matter because Jesus knows who He is. That's actually what's caused your panic anyway, is temporarily at least you have forgotten who He is. So look at this. Oftentimes, fearful circumstances, desperation helps us clarify, purify our priorities. I'll take you on a little journey here. It's so easy for us to drift off course. If you're anything like me, you realize it's so easy to drift in a direction you didn't know you were drifting. And you think you're in the place that you started, but it's these things that begin to mount up in your life. And we have good intentions to keep God first and probably think we are. We probably have told ourselves that we're growing steadily, but we've stabilized. And anytime that your faith stabilizes, you begin to drift. We allow other things in. We think we can manage other things. We begin to spin more plates. We begin to juggle more balls. We're convinced we can manage important things, good things. We let it in. And before long, they've crowded out any of our spiritual hunger, any of our spiritual maturity, any of our growth. Jesus becomes another thing that we have to manage, another thing that we have to feel guilty about not keeping up with. We don't stop and think about that. Most people never, not one time, consider the drift until they're at desperation wall. That's usually when we start to consider, how did I get here? How did I get here? These verses tell us that Jairus was one of the rulers of the synagogue. This synagogue was the local center of worship. Everybody would come and go through this. Everybody would know who he is. And if you lived in Capernaum, which is where this was probably located, there's not a person that wouldn't know Jairus. He was the ruler, kind of be like the president of the organization. He was a lay person, but he would have been elected by the spiritual leaders of the area as one of the rulers. He would be responsible for organizing and supervising the worship service. He would care for the scrolls and make sure that they were in order and ready to go and cleaned and taken care of. He would be in charge of running the weekly schools that would take place there. He would have the responsibility of keeping the congregation faithful to the law. He would be the one that would point fingers and help people out as they would go along through their life. He would help distribute money to the needy. Chances are you are going to come into contact with this man at some point in your life. Being the leader of the synagogue, it also means that he had very close ties to the Pharisees. And if you have close ties to the Pharisees, then you're not to support anybody but the Pharisees, and his appointed position would absolutely demand it. Hope you can see where I'm going here. So if he has this position, it's because the Pharisees recognizes his credit, his credibility, his prestige, his influence. Not only was he influential among the common people, he was also manipulatable by the Pharisees, impressionable. But look what crisis does. Look what desperation does. It clarifies. All his plan, all his reputation, all his pressure, all his standing, all his successes, all his prestige in the community suddenly, without warning, reorders itself. Everything that he had lived for, every favor he had ever given, it all reorders itself. And God's desire to be our priority never considers a person's worldly standing. I want you to think about that for a moment. You can try, but success and importance does not insulate anyone from tragedy and death. Now, we all want to be influential. Everybody wants to matter. But the truth of the matter is, nothing can insulate you from desperation from time to time. It may afford you a few more options. It may get you to a few extra doctors before But success can only do so much. And success, your reputation can never do more than God. If you're in opposition to Him, your plea of desperation may take longer. You may go through lots of other options before you get the last resort. But if you're aligned with Him, it seems to not take so long. So like if you're conscious of what God is doing and you're recognizing what God can do, has done, it's a whole lot easier to trust Him and to turn to Him. But if you are like selfishly pushing your plan and your way, it seems like it takes a lot longer to break through. Fearful situations also strip away our pride. In our culture, most men, I would imagine that it's a natural thing, not a culture, but perhaps. Most men tend to be prideful, no amens. I should have said that ahead of time. In their provision, in their protection, in their strength, in their capability, in their toughness, in their control. It's something we like to tell ourselves. And no man wants to admit that they're weak and needy. But notice here, fearful situations strip away our pride. Not just for men, for anyone. It strips away Jairus'. He fell at Jesus' feet, publicly nonetheless. Totally, 100% helpless. Now, remember, everybody knows this man. No one had ever seen him like this before. It wasn't a dignified place for a synagogue ruler to be, but he did not care because he was desperate. His fear for his daughter was much more than the fear of the fallout. See, it's actually a place of spiritual healing. This thing that no man would want actually brings about spiritual healing. We're not sure what he still thought of Jesus, but he knew what Jesus could do because he had heard somewhere along the line what Jesus could do. He knew that he needed Jesus. He was willing to admit his need and to be humbled, even if it cost him everything. That's what gives the Lord the opportunity to prove himself mightily on our behalf. So when you fight for yourself and you extinguish all of your options, it robs the glory from God. But when he can get you to a place where you can't possibly fix it, that's where he begins to get glory in your life. I remember a time that he did that in Israel. You remember Israel has their back against their enemy, Egypt, and they've got their facing the Red Sea. That's a pretty terrifying place to be. I know that every Israelite that was there in that audience that day is saying to themselves, what can we do? We have no weaponry. We have no strength. And here they come on chariots and mounted horse. What can we do? And you know what the Lord told Moses? You remember what he said to them? The Lord will fight for you. Only you remain silent. Well, I feel like that kind of goes against everything we want to do in that moment, does it not? But when you come and you cast yourself at Jesus' feet and say, Lord, you must do it or there is no hope, I think that's where he's glorified. When you exhaust all of your options and there is nothing left but Jesus, if it's going to be done, it's going to be you. There may be times in your fearful situation that's given to you so that those near you can see that God is fighting for you. This reduction in pride and dependence on Jesus was for the disciples to see as well. If you go back and look at the context, you will see this is an important step in their faith as well, to see this dependence. It's good for the townspeople to see Jairus placing his knees before Jesus. It's good for the Pharisees to see the influence that Jesus has on some of the rulers of the synagogue. It's for the little old lady who is desperate for her chance to trust. And this is the perfect distraction for her to step out and latch on. And of course it's great for Jairus and his household. But this story isn't just for Jairus. This story is being told in multiple different directions all at once. And it would be folly for Jairus to think that he's the only one benefiting from this desperate moment. But I can just about guarantee you, when you're desperate, you're the only one you can consider. These fearful situations, it's moments of desperation remind us that our bodies don't live forever, but our trust in Jesus does. I want you to remember that, because we are so bent on living here, planning for here, putting all of our efforts here. But your body will not live forever, but your trust in Jesus will. Lauren, we don't trust God like we should until we're forced to. Most people don't trust God until they're forced to trust Him. Nobody chooses Jesus when they're on the mountaintop. But that's where we all want to live, isn't it? But you let the bottom fall out in people's lives, and then all of a sudden, I need. Where's Jesus? I don't know what Jesus will do, but I know what He can do. Where's Jesus? What it will require is you to reprioritize your life and put Him not first, only. Jesus isn't going to settle for being first, only. And then everything else is not a priority. Everything else becomes an outflow of the Jesus life. Everything else. I don't know why we can't get it. And we try. We have good intentions of keeping Jesus there, but so many Christians believe that their job is their provider, and that their gun is their protector, and that their mouth is their relationship or their charisma or their charm. But I'm telling you, Jesus Christ is everything. I don't care what kind of job you have, Jesus is your provider. And in a heartbeat, all of that can go away. I don't care how good or what kind of good promotion you get. So your job is the tool that God puts in your pocket to be able to display His glory, not pay your bills. It cheapens it. And just for full disclosure, I have lots of guns. And for another full disclosure, I lock my door at night. Or so you know. I mean, He is our all in all, right? It is so easy to get moving back into that, yeah, but it's mine, and here's my plan, and here's my... Listen, Jesus will not settle for being first. But your relationship exists for His glory. Your health exists for His glory. Your words exist for His glory. Everything about your life exists for Him. And until you get that right, it's going to be desperation wall after desperation wall, because He loves you too much to let you roller skate through life. Because it's miserable. You're going to end up in the end and face death. So every now and then, there's a cataclysmic, seismic shift in your life so that you can have an opportunity to reprioritize. Some people get that over and over and over, that nudge, that shift, that I know what I need to, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. But then before long, we're spinning the plate, juggling the balls, going back to regular life. And then before you know it, we've drifted over here. And we think that we intend to get back to Jesus. We confess that Jesus is. So these moments of desperation are not things to be avoided. These moments of desperation are opportunity for us to move into a deeper trust, an abiding relationship with Him. The things and people that matter most to us in life can be gone in a second without warning. And when we stare death in the face, whether it's our own or the death of a loved one, we're suddenly reminded that life doesn't last long and we cannot control a breath. think that's why Ecclesiastes chapter 7 says it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living take it to heart. It's good to be reminded of death. It's good to be reminded of desperation, because it can continually strip our pride, strip our ego, strip our self-dependence, self-reliance, and remind us of what really matters. Desperate people do desperate things, right? Jairus had a position of prominence. He had to maintain good relations with the Jewish leaders. Jesus is definitely not the most popular person at this moment. In fact, before Luke, and chronologically, you got to look at the Gospels, but in Mark chapter 3, this is prior to this, it says the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against Jesus, how they could destroy him. Jesus is already on the hit list. They're already looking to kill him. And here Jairus, the synagogue ruler, is on his knees before him. He wouldn't have risked their disfavor by coming to Jesus if he didn't have to. And let me tell you something, there's many of us in this room, we'd come to Jesus if we hadn't had to. It's his fearful circumstance forced him to come and trust Jesus. But remember, this story isn't about a desperate man. It's about a God who uses every circumstance beyond our control to bring us to himself. And look at this. If this man had not had this desperate moment, his daughter would eventually have died apart from Jesus. Eventually, he would have died apart from Jesus. A good man with a great reputation, lots of influence, eternally separated from God in hell. Some of us today may be facing dire circumstance, desperate moments, struggling marriage, struggling children, health issues, financial fears or setbacks. But whatever your fearful situation is, it actually can be good if we reprioritize our life. Strip away all of our pride and self-reliance and fall on our knees before Jesus. That's when he begins to turn in our direction. Trusting him isn't easy, is it? I mean, he is. He's on his knees before Jesus, and he says, "My daughter is dying. I've heard that you do things." That's easier said than done, right? Look at this. He comes to Jesus. He believes that Jesus could. He'd done it before. Several hindrances that's going to get in the way now. Jairus had to continue. It's not just a matter of, and a lot of times, listen, and I know it's like a weekly thing for us, okay, for some of us. It's in the moment, it's just, I'm going to put God first. And then immediately we go out and go right back to normal life. How many of you have ever said you were going to do something at the end of a church service and not one thing changed in your life? Anybody be honest enough to say that? All right, well, anyway, so once you say yes to Jesus, there's got to be some proving, some testing that comes with it as well. He had already overcome all of his self thing, his personal obstacles. But once his heart was set, there were a few other things that had to be, you know the things. Anxiety. You ever been anxious and you want other people to be anxious with you? And sometimes they're not, and it makes you angry. If people don't take your problem as seriously as you take your problem. Anybody? I saw a meme this week. It said, not in the history of the world has anybody calmed down by being told to calm down. You saw it? Very true. Very true. When people don't reach the anxiety level that you are, Jesus turns and he starts following the man, and immediately, boom. I mean, I know what Jairus is thinking. Okay, I've done all the hard work. Let's go. We got to hurry. Not so fast. This new faith needs to be put to the test. Now, Jairus is thinking, I've got your attention. I am the only one in this moment. That he needs to remember something. You're not the only one, Jairus. You're not the only one. But it's not going to matter because there's plenty of Jesus for everybody. Except when you're in that moment of desperation, I don't think we're convinced of that. We want all of the spotlight. in that moment. So, not only does Jairus need to understand this, I think that everybody else watching needs to know it too. So, this older woman who they've not seen in 12 years because she's not allowed out in public. This older woman interrupted Jesus on the way to Jairus' house. And I know what Jairus is thinking. You have got to be kidding me. 3 steps in toward a home. I've got seconds. And why can't you touch him tomorrow, right? Are you anything like what I'm describing? Why can't you touch him later or another time? He's already moving in my direction. I was here first. My daughter's dying. Every second matters. My thing is worse than your thing. Well, that's what everybody thinks when you have a thing. Everybody thinks your thing is worse, my thing is worse than your thing. It doesn't say that, but I know that's how he feels because that's how I would feel if this were my daughter. And simultaneously, her best case scenario becomes his worst case scenario in the same moment. While Jesus is talking, telling her about her faith making her well, Jairus finds out that his daughter is dead. You imagine how you'd feel as a dad in that moment? His friends bring a truth, an experience that trumps whatever shred of hope that Jairus still carries. And what they say may be true, but hold on just a minute. Jairus has already gotten Jesus walking in his direction. So here's what Jairus is going to do. He's going to believe the facts that can be seen rather than trusting in what Jesus was already headed to do, what Jesus promised he would do. But we do the same thing, don't we? We have a tendency to look at the scenario, to look at the facts, rather than trust in the God of miracles. Now, he doesn't always provide a miracle, but he can always provide a miracle. They didn't consider what God's plan was. I don't know if Jairus understood who Jesus was. Maybe he's just a magician. Maybe he's just a really good guy. Maybe he's lucky on a couple of instances. But that quick, your daughter is dead. Boom, hopeless. Hopeless. But you're never hopeless when Jesus has already turned in your direction. And I got good news for you. He is always turned in your direction. Jesus knew what his word would do to any man. So I want you just to picture this for a moment. I want you to picture Jairus finally getting the confirmation from Jesus. 3 steps in, yank on Jesus' clothes. Jesus has this interaction with her, and it's, Jairus, your daughter's dead, leave him alone. Can you imagine just I failed as a husband, as a father, as a leader of faith. In every area of my life, I have failed. And Jesus, without saying a word, Jairus never had to say a word. Jesus knew how he felt, and he said, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And the context of the original language here is don't let fear be your final feeling. Don't be afraid. I know you're afraid right now. Don't be afraid. Only believe. Do not fear. Only believe. And she will be well. They just said she's dead. Now Jairus has another decision he's going to make. This is a step of faith for him. It's like, wait a minute, they just saw her dead, and you're going to say she'll be well. Well, I don't know exactly what Jairus is feeling at this moment, but he continues to walk with Jesus home. So there's some level of hope still in him. So with Jesus' help and against all reason, against all rationale, Jairus manages to hang on. And then they arrive at his house. Here's another obstacle, right? Mark chapter 5, verse 38 is a parallel telling of this in Mark's gospel. It says, when they arrived, there was a commotion of people weeping and wailing loudly. It's a much larger issue than how Luke portrays it. That doesn't mean that they're contradictory. It just means there's more detail, different parts of the story. This death had already been prepared for him. By the time they walked to Jairus' house, which was nearby, it had to be nearby. He was the ruler of the synagogue. But by the time they got there, so the wailers were already there because they expected there to be a death. That's how last resort Jesus was. They already were expecting a death today before Jairus was willing to walk to Jesus. And so when they get there, they're already in this frenzy. What they would do, these were hired professional wailers. It's actually the law. They expected, like if a man's wife died, you had to have at least 2 flute players and a professional mourner. That's bare minimum. If your wife dies, for anybody. But this man is a man of means. There's going to be a lot more than that. What they would do is they'd hang their head low and they'd start whining and wailing, and their hair would be tossed, and they'd just work themselves up into an absolute frenzy, and it would be contagious, and it would go on for an extended period of time. Jesus shows up, and he quieted them. He said, "Stop weeping, for she's not died, she's asleep." Now, that's what it says in English, but it's a little more blunt in the original. Jesus walks up and he says, in English, this is paraphrased, but knock it off. Stop it. That's pretty much, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself because you're already wailing and she's not dead. She's just asleep. Asleep. He hadn't even been in there yet. Well, that's hopeful thinking. Jesus hadn't even been in there. This guy doesn't even know that she's dead. And he's saying things like this. They had seen it. Therefore, it must be true. Jairus is faced with another hindrance to his faith. Is he going to believe Jesus? Or is he going to believe these mourners' words? They had seen it. Jesus said, if you'll keep believing, she'll be all right. What are you going to choose? In that moment, what are you going to choose? The words of Jesus or the words of those who have seen it? Jesus' words have left some to say that this girl wasn't truly dead, but she was just in a coma. And Jesus, knowing all things, Jesus knew that she wasn't quite dead yet, and he knew what to do to bring her out of this coma. These ancient people weren't medically trained like we are now, and so they couldn't know for sure, but Jesus did. But look at verse 55 of Luke 8, and you will see that the doctor Luke makes it very, very clear that her spirit returned. So she wasn't in a coma. She wasn't, spoiler alert, she wasn't asleep. She was 100% dead. So why did Jesus say she was asleep? Because he's giving him a little parable here. It's kind of subtle. But there's two things going on. There's one meaning for those who believed, and there's another meaning for those who don't believe. For those who believed, there's the hope that she would be awakened, because in Jesus' presence, death is always temporary, just like sleep. But for those who didn't believe, those who scoffed, Jesus is just a man who didn't know what he's talking about. We know that she is dead, and there is no life after death. He couldn't know as much as we know. Jesus, I love it. Jesus doesn't need the fanfare. I mean, if this were me, listen, and I'm not saying that if this were me, I'd say, well, let me just show you. I'll just show you. I want everybody to see it. Jesus doesn't need fanfare. He's not interested in fanfare. No, you don't get to see it. You get out of the house. I want these guys to see it, mom and dad. I want you to see it. And then when he raises her from the dead, he says, now don't you tell them out there how I did this. Because they don't get to see it. They don't get to hear about it. For those who believed, more is given. For those who didn't, even what little they had will be taken away. That's why he said it. You're going to face desperate and fearful situations. Believing in Jesus is not going to be easy. There's going to be other people with similar struggles and other people saying, it's okay. You're going to have lots of things that you're going to have to go through, but you're going to have to keep trusting in the word of Jesus. Keep trusting in the direction that Jesus has turned. You're going to face hindrances and you're going to face setbacks and you're going to experience things that's going to shake your confidence in Jesus. And the world's going to laugh at you and they're going to say, you're a fool to trust in Jesus. We have the facts on our side. But we can overcome every hindrance if we put our reliance in Jesus. In fact, sometimes those difficulties and desperation is placed in our path so that those outside must stretch their faith muscle, just like we're asked to do, so that other people can witness. Can you imagine when that girl finally gets up and comes outside and all of the mourners going, what in the world? Now, I don't even care what you think about Jesus. You've got to do something with that. I love the way that Jesus encourages and nurtures Jairus' new faith. I want you to look at this. Jesus is willing. Now, this is very important to many of us, all of us truly, that a lot of people wait to come to Jesus until they're sure. Wait to come to Jesus until their faith is perfect. I mean, a lot of people are like, one of these days I won't make that decision. I'm just not ready yet, right? Or I need to learn more before I step out here. We just talk ourselves out of full reliance, full devotion, because we keep waiting to have to prove it to ourselves in some way. But look here at where Jairus is, right? Jairus believed in Jesus, but it's not a strong faith. I mean, it's hindrance, roadblock all the way along. There's several other miracles that have gone on just prior to this that there is no doubt that Jairus is privy to. Jesus' second miracle in Cana was when the nobleman came to Jesus about his son. His son was sick, and he came to Jesus, and he said, Jesus, I need you to come to my house and heal my son. And Jesus said, that's mine. Sorry, he didn't say that. Jesus came to him and said, some people will only believe if they see. If you go home right now, I've already healed your son. At my word, your son is made well. And it says the nobleman believed the word of Jesus, and when he returned home, his son was healed. That's powerful. Listen, that spread like wildfire. 20 miles north, up on the seacoast, Capernaum, there was a centurion who sent some servants out to Jesus. And it was his favorite servant, the centurion's servant. And they came to Jesus and they said, listen, our master, the centurion, has a servant that's very, very sick and he's dying. And he said that you could heal with just the word. Just speak the word. Jesus said, I'm going to go. I'm going to go to his house. He gets close to the house. Centurion comes out. He says, I'm sending servants out to you. I'm completely unworthy for you to come to my house. Just speak the word. This is in the same city where these people went to the synagogue where Jairus was the ruler. There's no doubt that he understood these stories. And yet Jairus goes to Jesus and he says, I've heard what you can do, but I'm not ready to believe your word just yet. I'm going to need you to come to the house. I want you to lay hands on my daughter. He knows that he can speak the word. In fact, if he would have come to Jesus and said, Jesus, speak the word and my daughter will be healed, I don't know how this story would have been different. He wouldn't have cared if this woman had gotten in the way, because all Jesus had to say is, pooh, she's already healed. It's just like he did with the centurion when he said, I've not found such faith in all of Israel. No, this man cashed out on that. No, I barely believe. I'm only here because, she was taking her last breaths when I left the house. That's the only reason I'm here now. I got way more in this than the centurion did. I'm a lot higher up on the totem pole than the centurion is. I'm going to need you to come and touch her. But here's the deal. What's Jesus do? Okay, I'll meet you wherever your faith is. Listen, for those of you who struggle with like faith, the amount of faith you have doesn't matter. It's what you do with it that matters, right? You can't build your faith, but you turning in the direction of Jesus consistently is what builds your faith. Jesus builds your faith, not you. You don't have to have perfect faith to come to Jesus. All you have to do is to believe the stories of what he's done. I love that. That just like sets me free. I don't have to have a perfect faith all the time. Sometimes you can struggle. Sometimes you can have lots of obstacles. Sometimes you can think you might not make it through. Sometimes you don't know if he will or not. But that's all you need for Jesus to work. And Jesus can heal from a distance, but it's going to require faith, and it's going to require a lack of pride. It's going to require a restructuring of your priorities. It's going to require a commitment. Jesus healed both of these ones with just a word, but Jairus says, "No, I need to see you touch her." He didn't have the faith to believe that yet. Now, I think that if he had known that this little old lady was going to interrupt him, he probably wouldn't say, "Say it, say it, say it." I just picture it. All of a sudden, I can believe now in that. So, Jesus is so gracious, right? He doesn't refuse to work on your behalf unless your faith is perfect. You may be one that's crying out, "Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief." But you can come to Jesus wherever you are. In any circumstance you are. It does not matter how strong your faith is. You do not have to. I know we talk about moving mountains and all that. Man, I've never known anybody to move a mountain. We don't need to move mountains. Jesus didn't tell us that we should be doing that. Jesus is just saying, hey, this is how much faith it would take to move a mountain, the size of a mustard seed. It's the smallest seed, size of a mustard seed. If you had that little bit of faith, you don't need that kind of faith to believe. Seems like a hindrance to Jairus, but actually what Jesus is doing in this very moment, I want you to think about it. This woman is not a hindrance. This woman is a gift. She struggled for 12 years, and Jesus has been waiting for her to get desperate enough to choose him. Somewhere or another, we are a little harder on Jairus than we are this little old lady, because little old ladies are cute. No, she'd been struggling for 12 years before she was desperate enough. And so what happens is while Jesus is dealing with her, Jairus is like, let's go already. Anxiety through the roof. But he's getting ready to hear some terrible news, and he's going to need the things he sees just prior to the terrible news in order to get him through to get home. If it hadn't been for the little old lady, 30 seconds? Is that going to make the difference? No, this little girl's dead when Jairus gets home, period. But now he's got a little hope, because I don't know what Jesus will do, but now I've seen what he can do. And sometimes he gives us people in our life. I don't know. I may be hitting my head against the wall over and over again. I don't know what God's going to do, but hearing what he does in your life gives me hope to hang on. But if I'm only focused on my own self and I'm only listening to my own mind, I probably am not open. I'm probably not open to hearing what God is doing in your life. This begins to strip the selfishness away. We begin to see the needs of other people. And I love how Jesus deals with her, you know. I mean, she's been 12 years in her affliction. That's the same number of years that Jairus' daughter is. That's not an accident. Jesus calls this little old lady daughter. Well, not only is he claiming to be the creator, he's telling Jairus, this is my daughter. I know you love yours. And I know yours is dying. And so is mine. And I love her too. I'm going to heal your daughter, but I'm also going to heal mine. I'm going to show you what I can do. I want to show you my love. The timing of this is not a hindrance. Oh, it's a hindrance to Jairus' the way he's looking. It's not a hindrance to Jesus. It's an opportunity for him to get Jairus to trust him even more in a moment of hopelessness. And I'm telling you, folks, if you had the full picture of all your desperate moments, I promise you, God has sent you lots of little old ladies, things that you think are hindrances that he's using to bail you out of other situations. His timing is perfect. It's impeccable. Jairus is put on hold. Sometimes God puts us on hold. Prayers don't seem to be heard. We go through silence. We go through seasons. We wonder why God isn't answering our prayers. But then we hear how he's answered someone else's prayers, and we can hang on just a little longer. Or we can become selfish, become prideful, critical, hard-hearted, stiff-necked. I think it's funny how, I want you to see this, I'm almost finished. I want you to see how this woman is, like her healing is public. Everybody in town saw her healing. Everybody saw it. But Jairus' daughter is private. Don't tell anybody how I did this. Because the miracle isn't the important thing. A person publicly displaying their faith, that's the important thing. Jesus doesn't need the fanfare of miracles. Jesus needs us to publicly identify with him as our healer. So Jesus deals with the little girl. He took the little dead girl's hand. According to the law, this was a defiling act, right? You know, you can't touch dead people. Jesus couldn't be defiled by death. He's trumping death right now, right? I mean, right here, he's already exercising dominion over death. He's communicating love is stronger than death. His touch communicated his care. The little girl didn't know he lifted her hand, but mom and dad knew. Jairus and his wife knew how caring this Jesus is in the face of death. You remember Jesus was told by Jairus, just come and touch her. Jesus come and lifted her hand, but then he spoke the words, child, arise. It was always his word that was going to heal her. It wasn't CPR. It wasn't some defibrillator. It wasn't some medicine. It wasn't some other form Jesus used to resuscitate her. It was always his word. If you remember the widow of Nain's son, Jesus spoke and he raised up. If you remember what he said to Lazarus, Lazarus, come forth. He's not using like normal means. Jesus' word is always the thing that brings life to dead things. Right? Listen to what he said in John 5:28. Jesus said, an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs shall hear my voice and shall come forth, some to eternal life, others to judgment. What a claim. There's a day coming when his voice will cause bodies decomposed for centuries are going to be resurrected. And even now he speaks to the spiritually dead and those who are desperate enough to empty themselves of themselves can have life. Despite all the scoffers and the facts of the world, Jesus, by his word, has already given life. This little girl, physical life, emotional life, spiritual life. And he does the same thing today. However he chooses to heal. There's a lot of people who died during Jesus' life that he didn't choose to heal. But a time is coming when by his word he will speak, and everything that has ever been alive will have to give a report. Some unto everlasting life, some to everlasting judgment. And all that this life is seems to be preparation for that. One desperate moment after another desperate moment. Opportunity after opportunity to exercise our faith in Jesus Christ. But so many choose the facts of what they can see, the life, the dreams, the plans, the hopes, the spinning plates. I'm going to be something one day. But we need to make sure that we trust Jesus. We reduce our pride, shift our priorities, choose Him only. And what the things of this life that we consider hindrances to our plans are simply where God interacts with us to continually breathe life into our hope. Let's pray together today. Will you stand with me? Lord, I thank you for the life that you give. Thank you for allowing us to have the end of the story. It's really easy to go back and see what Jairus should have done because we have the last verse. But when we are desperate, when we are hurting, when we're in crisis, when we're experiencing fear, we don't have the last verse. We're kind of like Job, who goes through all sorts of adversity, but he doesn't have the last chapter. But we have his last chapter. We have Jairus' last verse. We have Peter's last statements. We know that all of these things are by your word, and so we don't need to have the last verse or the last chapter of our life. We don't need to know the next step in our moments of desperation. What we need to know is that you have the word. And yet with a word you can, but your heart brings you to us and touches us and gently gives us hope to go one more step. So I pray, Lord, this morning that this message would be an encouragement to those here this morning that may be struggling with something. But there is no doubt sometime this week, somebody in this room is going to get some desperate things that they're going to have to go through, things that are going to have to be orchestrated. And rather than trying to pull out all the punches and do every fight ourselves, I pray that we very quickly just remember your word, live by your word. I don't know what you will do, but I know what you can do. So we trust you. And today, Lord, we stake a claim. We trust you. And I pray where we don't believe, there may be those in here today that have never put their faith in you. I pray that today would be a day, Lord, that they make a choice. It is a choice. It's a choice to get up and walk away from that desperate place and to go publicly and declare, I need you, Jesus. Every hour I need you. Sometimes we don't recognize our desperation till the bottom falls out. And in the meantime, sometimes we're not using moments that you've helped us to overcome to speak hope and life into one another. We don't even know who's hurting because we're so busy telling our own story. We're not listening to the desperation of the world around us where we can bolster them and turn them to you as their hope instead of solving their own problem or speaking some sort of our own words into their hopelessness. Lord, I pray that we'd be a lot more gospel-centered as we remember what you've done to resurrect us. You gently have touched us and you've raised us up. You continually give us nourishment through your word. Help us, Lord, to live a life. We are so unworthy of it. But you've come anyway. So I pray that our lives would reflect your glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
If you need help finding or taking your next step, send us a message at hello@myconnectchurch.cc.